I believe that we are live, guys. I hope so. I'm going to be taking your comments. We're going to be talking about vaccine, the Johnson Johnson vaccine, the AstraZeneca vaccine, the clotting risk for these very rare clots that I did a video on yesterday that's been all over the news today. And yesterday when I did the video on AstraZeneca, I talked about, it's probably something we should look at with Johnson Johnson since they use the same basic technology for these vaccines. So let's get into it. Bring your comments. As always, anyone who supports the show, thank you so much. As if you're part of the supporter tribe, you can also support the show with a one-time donation at paypal.me/ZDoggMD. And if you leave a comment or a question, I will email you back. And if you do it now, I'll try to read your comment or question on the air. All right, guys, welcome. So Erica Black is here. Tizzy Cregan's here. Ashley Stewart on YouTube, the Foxy Project. So it's happening. Okay, here's the thing. It has been a long year as far as trying to figure out our way out of this pandemic. Now, you can listen to the people who deny that it's even a thing, but 500,000 dead Americans alone is probably a thing. So let's just see where I'm coming from here. This is a real pandemic. It's not the end of the world. I'm tired of all the fear. I think actually this thing's almost over. Vaccines are the main solution out of this. Now, the vaccines we have currently are the mRNA vaccines, Pfizer, Moderna, that are approved, at least in the US, and the Johnson Johnson, which is a different technology, and AstraZeneca in the rest of the world, Europe, Canada. It's not yet being offered in the US. All right. So what are the differences between these vaccines to start with? Well, and again, if you want to go deeper on this whole story, I've done previous videos on this, but let's just summarize real quick. Messenger RNA is a different type of molecule, and it's enclosed in a lipid nanoparticle in the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccines that are introduced into cells, teach the cell in the cytoplasm of the cell how to make spike protein that then your immune system responds to by making antibodies that then knocks, when the virus does infect you, knocks the virus out of commission by neutralizing it. That's the simplest explanation. The way the AstraZeneca and the Johnson Johnson vaccines work are they use a different vector, a different agent to deliver genetic material to cells. And the genetic material is different. So instead of messenger RNA, they're using DNA, right? Double-stranded DNA, I believe. And that DNA is introduced into your cells through the injection via an adenovirus. An adenovirus is it's a virus, but it doesn't replicate in humans. So in the case of the AstraZeneca vaccine, it's a chimpanzee adenovirus that doesn't replicate in humans. In the case of the Johnson Johnson vaccine, it is a adenovirus 86. It doesn't replicate in humans, and it's been recombined with this DNA that teaches the cells how to make the spike protein. And each of these viral vectors, you introduce about 50 billion of these viral particles per dose, and they then introduce the DNA into your cells. The DNA then finds its way into the nucleus. It's transcribed into RNA. RNA goes into the cytoplasm and is turned into protein, spike protein, presented on the cell, and you get the immune response. So that's the mechanism of those. Now, the trial data seem to show that all these vaccines are pretty effective, and in the trials, pretty damn safe. So remember, these trials are tens of thousands of people, double-blind, placebo-controlled trials. So you're going to see a big safety signal there if something's really wrong. What you won't see is extremely rare events. So things that are, on the order of, 1 in a million, 1 in 250,000, something like that. It's hard to see in a trial like that. And these are super rare events. So what they started to find is in the post-marketing surveillance. So when the vaccine's out in the world and now you're getting millions of people vaccinated, you start to see a signal. So you're watching, and the whole world is watching these vaccines, right? So looking at the mRNA vaccines, they're not seeing a lot of signal that looks like it's anything above and beyond what you would normally get in the background rate. So let's say you have a case of a blood clot. Well, the number of those in the mRNA vaccines that they've seen are no higher than what you would expect to see in the same population during the same period of time. But what happened with AstraZeneca? So AstraZeneca, what they started finding when they started in England. And the key thing here is they started with older people. So they were really doing a very smart thing, targeting people at the highest risk. So people who were older, with AstraZeneca, which was developed in partnership with Cambridge. So it's kind of a UK thing to some degree. And they rolled it out and they didn't see any big safety signal concern there. Well, then it rolled out to the rest of Europe. Now you're talking about 34 million people vaccinated, with AstraZeneca. And what they started to notice were these cases arising, typically in young women. So you're talking about, women, ages like 18 to 49. And they were having these really weird blood clots. So by weird, I mean, you expect when you talk about blood clots, in most cases, what we see in the hospital or in the clinic, the run-of-the-mill blood clot is usually, apart from your strokes and your heart attacks, which are also blood clots, right? Typically arterial blood clots. The typical venous blood clots we see are deep vein thromboses in the legs that can sometimes break off and go to the lungs. That's like the main thing we see. It's the most common thing. These weren't necessarily that. These were cavernous venous sinus thrombosis in the brain. Unusual. Like the background rate of that is quite low. And in conjunction with another really unusual thing, which was this case of low platelets. So our platelets help our blood clot, and they were plummeting in these cases. So it looked like a syndrome called heparin-induced thrombocytopenia, which you get very low platelets, and then you also get blood clots. It's a kind of paradox. And I talked in yesterday's video about why that is. And it's felt to be due to these antibodies that are made to something called platelet factor 4, PF4, in heparin-induced thrombocytopenia. And what they found was actually, and that results when heparin forms complexes, because heparin is negatively charged, forms complexes with PF4, and then the body creates an antibody response. Now, this can happen in up to like 5% of surgical patients that get heparin, but we still give heparin because it's often not that severe. It's manageable. You stop the heparin, it's okay. But these cases were interesting because these were pretty severe clots, cases of bleeding, not associated with heparin. So scientists started to get concerned appropriately. And this is how science works. People, I think who argue that, we don't have any, we're just giving people experimental vaccines and this and that. It's like, no, the experiment was a randomized controlled trial. In any drug, you have the post-marketing surveillance where you see what happens when it's out in hundreds of, thousands of, if not millions of people. And that's what you're seeing with this. And the surveillance caught this, even though there were 222 cases out of 34 million people in Europe for AstraZeneca. That's 0.0006%. All right. They're speculating that rate, depending on your age group, could be as high as 1 in 100,000 or 1 in 250,000 cases can have this very rare clotting disorder. Now, it took a while, but they actually said, well, this is actually above what we think the background rate is because it's happening in a narrow time window, about 5 to 10 days after getting that shot. And on top of that, you're seeing a number of cases that is unusually high in a very short period of time since the vaccine was introduced. So that's already painting a case, right? It's and you can contrast this with, say, vaccines and autism. They go, my child developed signs and symptoms of autism very close to the time they got the vaccine. So everyone said, there's this correlation. Is there causation? And every other following study showed none. In this case, what they said is, okay, there's correlation. The numbers are high. Is there something else going on? Is there even biological plausibility? Like what could be doing this? And that's where these scientists in Europe, and they put out a couple different papers in New England Journal, and they said, you know what? This looks a lot like heparin-induced thrombocytopenia. Maybe there's a similar mechanism going on. They tested for PF4 antibodies, and they were there. And they said, okay, so something else other than heparin is causing these PF4 antibodies. Now, this can happen naturally. So some people have autoimmune disease that makes their own antibodies against PF4. There may be other drugs that do this, and there's causes where we have no idea what's going on. So it does happen. It's not unprecedented, but it's pretty clear that it's associated with this vaccine. And now increasingly it's clear that the vaccine likely causes this. It just all the pieces fall into place, you can make a pretty compelling case. Nothing's 100%, but it's pretty compelling. So let's pause for a second and understand why might this be? Like, what could it be doing? And there are a couple theories, couple main theories. And I talked yesterday about a bunch of other stuff. Look at that video if you're interested in that. But the bottom line is, one of them is that DNA is coming out of these viruses into the, before they get injected in the cell, and DNA is negatively charged and it's forming complexes with PF4 the way heparin would, and it's behaving like that. That's one possibility, right? And it's doing it more often because the immune system's jazzed up because you're getting this vaccine and there's already a big immune response. The other possibility is that the vaccine itself is somehow interfering with people's peripheral tolerance who already make some antibodies to PF4, and that's kind of complicated. We won't get into it. So either way, there's some mechanism that's proposed, and we won't know until more data comes out. So here's what I want to talk about today, though. So because I think this is where, with this news, people are freaking out. It's like, oh my God, I don't want to die of a cavernous sinus thrombosis in my brain. I don't want to die by bleeding out, because that's the other problem with this, is you use up all your clotting factors and platelets and you have bleeding, sometimes into the brain that can be fatal, sometimes into your gastrointestinal tract. I don't want this Johnson Johnson vaccine. If I'm in America, I don't want the AstraZeneca vaccine. I don't want any of this stuff. And in fact, just don't even give me a vaccine. All right, well, this is where we really need to talk about some perspective on this. All right. Let's imagine that AstraZeneca and Johnson Johnson are the only two vaccines available. There's no mRNA vaccines, none of that. It's just those two. How would you look at this? It turns out every single medical intervention we do has some risk. Putting on a seatbelt has some risk, right? That you could be decapitated or injured by the seatbelt itself, but it has some benefit. You don't fly out of the car. You don't hit the dashboard. It works with the airbag. And with seatbelts, for example, it's been calculated that the risks of the seatbelt are way outweighed by the benefit, assuming you're wearing them correctly, et cetera. There may be some people that are just more anatomically unlucky and the seatbelt can cause them harm more likely, but we don't have enough information to know who those people are. Now, let's look at any medication. So if you take ibuprofen, if you take aspirin, these non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, so-called NSAIDs, you increase your risk of having a heart attack. You increase your risk of harming your kidneys. You increase your risk of potentially fatal GI bleeding or ulceration with these medications. You can even have unusual drug side effects from any medication, like Stevens-Johnson syndrome, where your skin literally peels off and you have to be treated like a burn victim. That can happen with almost any drug, including the NSAIDs. And those risks they're not zero, and they may even be quite a bit higher than the ascertained risk so far for blood clots, these unusual blood clotting syndromes with these vaccines. Remembering that these syndromes seem to focus on female patients, not exclusively, but pretty largely female patients who are younger, less than 50 years old. So you could actually look at risk and go, well, let's see. For example, with the Johnson Johnson vaccine, there were 6 cases of these cavernous venous thrombosis with low platelets in 6.8 million doses given. It's about 1 in a million, right? For context, the odds of you in a given year getting struck by lightning are 1 in 500,000. Now, with AstraZeneca, looking at the data in Europe, it's more like I said, 0.0006%. And I think they were predicting based on, if you just look at, like, say, people in their 20s, right? It's more like in the UK, say, where there's a prevalence of COVID, you're looking at more like 1 in 100,000 risk. So more likely than getting struck by lightning, but still pretty damn rare. But the side effects of non-steroidal over-the-counter medications may even be higher than that. So we have to understand that we take risk every day. So the question is, what's the benefit of the vaccine? And how then do you think about your own risk and what decision to make? So The benefit of the vaccine is obviously not getting COVID, not dying of COVID, not getting spreading COVID, which we don't talk about that. We don't actually talk about the benefit of the vaccine being actually not making other people sick, because it's actually true. But we tend to ignore the fact that the public actually may have some altruism, and that the desire to actually do good for society is actually somewhat ingrained in many of us and should be encouraged. But we don't talk about that, but that's a big effect, getting to community immunity. But just from a selfish standpoint, don't get sick. Don't make your family sick. Not 100%, right? But it's a risk spectrum. So that's a big benefit. But the question is it a big benefit for a 25-year-old woman with no other medical problems, who's maybe on oral contraceptives and maybe has undiagnosed factor V Leiden that puts them at higher risk for clot, or has some genetic predisposition to forming anti-PF4 antibodies? We just don't know, because we can't test for those things easily. What's the risk-benefit ratio for her? Well, the benefit of the vaccine is contributing to herd immunity, not getting sick and missing work. Very small benefit from avoiding ICU. They calculated it in Great Britain, in that age group, as being, you have about a 0.9 to 6.9 per 100,000 risk of getting ICU level hospitalized for COVID in that age group. So pretty unusual, not zero. And that range is because some people are more exposed to COVID, and so their risk is higher. So the 6.9 out of 100,000 is for people who are, exposed much more to COVID, maybe an essential worker, or somebody who like drives for Instacart or something, whatever the British equivalent of Instacart is. So that being said, your risk of COVID, the risk of getting ill from the vaccine, which again is very small, but it's not zero, and the benefit, because by eliminating or lowering your risk of COVID, that's how you do that calculation for you. What's the answer for you? I can't tell you. That's the calculation you do for yourself. Now, as far as the sort of fear and panic, remember, the rates of this thing happening are quite low. If there were no other vaccines, you could say quite confidently, and I do believe this, that both AstraZeneca and Johnson Johnson would be a fine individual. If we had nothing else, it'd be a fine choice as a vaccine. And I would argue that everyone who feels their risk is high enough, meaning they're worried about COVID at all, should get those vaccines. And we should be very vigilant in, especially women, for looking for symptoms. And that's quite simple, right? There's a few things you look for. And this typically happens about 5 to 10 days out from the vaccine. So headache, abdominal pain, leg pain or swelling, shortness of breath. You're looking at clots. Leg pain is from a leg clot. Shortness of breath is from a leg clot that's gotten into the lung, called pulmonary embolism. And the abdominal pain is from rare blood clots that happen in the venous system of the gut, which we've seen in this syndrome as well. Those are also unusual. And actually the index case presented with one of those and a cavernous sinus, the 49-year-old healthcare worker who was vaccinated. I forget in which European country. And so you can actually then think about your own risk. Now, that's if there were no other vaccines. And remember, in many parts of the world, there aren't. So that is the calculation you do. AstraZeneca is the hope for the developing world. It's the hope for the world. AstraZeneca developed it to be cheap, easy to transport and store, and effective. And it is. And it's really quite heartbreaking to see this happen. But it's also inspiring to go, oh, the science actually does work. It's horrible to get one of these rare clotting syndromes, right? You don't want to be that person who's struck by lightning, and you want to do everything you can to prevent that. But the system generally works. Now, the thing is, we have other vaccines. So if you have the mRNA vaccines, which have not been shown to do this, there's blood clotting, but it's not unusual blood clotting. It's no higher than what you would expect in the background rate. And this has been given to millions of people in the United States. So, this is now an important calculation if you have a choice. So what a lot of countries are saying that can say this is, well, I think for people younger than 50 or 60 who are at lower risk for COVID complications and higher risk for having that lightning strike them with the rare blood clot thing, think about the mRNA vaccines. And by the way, Novavax, which is a totally different approach, is coming down the pipe as well. Purified protein with an adjuvant. We'll talk about that another time. So, and by the way, the Chinese vaccine and Sputnik are also adenovirus, I believe. And so they may have the same difficulty. If we can call it a difficulty, it's again, it's an adverse event that's now known with a mechanism potentially from a medication. And so as long as you're informed, you can make the decision and your doctor can talk to you about it. So if you have the other one, then I think, younger people, if they have the choice, they can say, okay, well, maybe I just don't want that risk at all. I'm going to do the mRNA vaccines. Now, the question is, what happens if you've already gotten the Johnson Johnson just a few days ago? Like some people have messaged me and they're panicked. They're scared. Don't be scared. Don't be panicked. The risk is incredibly low, but be vigilant for those symptoms and signs that I talked about: headache, abdominal pain, leg swelling, shortness of breath. Those are the kind of things you want to watch for. Any signs of bleeding, those are the things you want to watch for. And then the nice thing is, if there is a nice thing, is that these things may be quite treatable. Intravenous IG, actually blood thinners, which is interesting because you're trying to prevent the clotting in the setting of that. Sometimes you have to give platelets. You avoid heparin. So we kind of know how to do this. Now let's look at some comments. Is there a higher risk of getting the clotting disorder if you already have diagnosed autoimmune disease, Katie Cole? We don't know because they haven't been able to tease that out. I'll say this. I think one of the people in the series they looked at had factor V Leiden, which is a clotting predisposition. I actually have that. And but it doesn't look like there's other clear correlations with autoimmunity, et cetera. Now, it is interesting that it's mostly women. Women tend to have a much higher risk of autoimmune disease. They also tend to be on, depends on that age group, on oral contraceptives, which can increase your blood clotting risk. I have not seen association with that yet, but that doesn't mean it isn't there. But this is a different mechanism than what is felt to be the oral contraceptive mechanism, but still. Let's see. Other questions here. Excited that you mentioned SJS. Had it when I was young. Most people don't know what it is. Effing sucked, but my skin is now baby smooth. The comment scrolled away. Thanks for the stars, by the way. Tiffany Storch on YouTube says, what do you think the risks are for pregnant women with clotting issues coming up, plus the higher rate of clotting in pregnant women, a 3% higher rate than normal miscarriage in February 2021? So, okay, there's more data. This is being studied currently. We have to be very clear about pregnancy. With the mRNA vaccines, there is no clear evidence at all that this is harming women. And in fact, the contrary. The question about bumps and miscarriage rate, I haven't looked at that data, but I would worry that COVID is causing bumps and miscarriages because we know that it does that. Getting COVID when you're pregnant is a high risk event. It happens. Some people do fine. Some people don't. COVID causes blood clots at an incredibly high rate. Something like 16% of hospitalized patients or something. I mean, it is not a joke. So preventing the COVID is probably a higher priority for pregnant women than worrying about what is probably a non-existent risk for the mRNA vaccines. Now, for these other Johnson & Johnson, we just don't have the data. I don't think these women in the series were pregnant. That has not been reported. You imagine that it would be if it were. Pregnancy is a hypercoagulable state. You have a higher risk of clot, but this is a mechanism that's quite different. We're talking about a very specific type of clotting disorder, which is a consumptive coagulopathy. This isn't your run-of-the-mill blood clot, and that's why I think we can look at it a little differently. Things that would normally predispose us to clotting may not affect this syndrome because this is different. This is some weird immune thing. Now, that emerges when you treat millions of people. You're going to see these very unusual configurations because every human is unique, but you're going to see these very unusual things. And luckily, we're actually seeing it, responding to it, sciencing it. That's important. So pregnancy, and this work is being done. I have some knowledge of it that I can't share, but I think, let's just say there's no evidence that pregnant women should not get the mRNA vaccines. And quite to the contrary. The antibodies that you generate seem to be passed to the fetus, which is wonderful news because then the child has some immunity, like all immunity that's passed from mother to child in the form of antibodies. That's how it's done. These are good questions. Keep going, you guys. Whirlybird says, all the best intentions of medical minds won't prevent an unknown delayed side effect down the road from new technology. People are right to be apprehensive of a rushed vaccine from a virus of questionable origin. All right, let's address this because this is a common question. And I'm not going to talk about the questionable origin of the virus, but I'm going to talk about your other concerns, which are valid. So, first of all, was the vaccine rushed? I've done other videos on this. All the red tape was taken away. The risk was taken away from the pharmaceutical organization. So what normally takes 10 years off and billions of dollars was now taking billions of dollars, but done the same way. In other words, you still do the end stage of it, which is the key thing, which is the phase 3 trial. You actually do it better. You have tons of people. You have a ton of disease in the community. So instead of taking 3-5 years to finish the trial to get enough patients, you can do it in months. So this was unique and awesome. And it's building on technology that's been developed over decades, the mRNA technology. So I think I would take issue with the term rushed. I will say that this is an emergency use authorization. You are talking about vaccinating healthy people. You should be very apprehensive when people want to do that because you could cause more harm than the disease itself. Vaccinating a ton of healthy people who are low risk for a disease that's very rare with a vaccine that even has a 1 in a million side effect can be problematic. Now, the thing is, when you talk about childhood vaccines, the reason those diseases are rare are because we vaccinate. If we stop vaccinating, they are no longer rare, right? So children's vaccines are a totally different subject. Now, let's talk about this vaccine. So people are absolutely right to question everything. I did too. I questioned, you watch my old videos. I'm like, this vaccine's not going to save us. This is never going to happen in time. There's all these potential pitfalls, antibody-dependent enhancement, all kinds of stuff that could happen. And then watch as I'm convinced by emerging evidence, right? By the way, pharma don't pay me. Y'all pay me. Supporter Tribe pays me. Go look at the Sunshine Act. Go search me. You'll see what pharma has paid me. So that being said, and you should question financial motives. You absolutely should. That is all throughout medicine. Where's the money going on this? Like, why does he want to do a spine surgery on me? Like, what's the motivation? Okay, they make a lot of money. Is it going to benefit me? Go look at the data. Maybe physical therapy is where I should start. You know, maybe other pain control, biopsychosocial pain control strategies are better. So you're right to question that. However, and you're right about best intentions. These are good intentions. When you still look at this, the best way to look at this is in terms of risk. So COVID is still a huge problem. And I think if you don't believe that, that's a problem. Now, you guys know who I am. I'm still saying, I know it's a huge problem. We still need to open up. We still need to vaccinate. We still need to open schools. We still need to get back the economy. We need to do targeted risk intervention. Like, I'm not the one tut-tutting you to stay home and wear a mask. That's insane Zoomocracy talk from rich people who can effing do that, right? Which, by the way, I am one of. So I could totally stay home and make a living and be fine and yell at you guys to stay home. I never will do that to you because I know humans need social contact. I know that this disease has an infection fatality rate of 0.2 to 0.3. That is not something that you destroy the lives and the fabric of society for. You make targeted interventions. I think masking is okay. I think social distancing is fine, but I think opening up where you can, opening schools, getting people vaccinated, get us back very, very fast. So in this case, the vaccine would save lives because especially in high-risk groups. Now, if I'm doing a risk calculation and someone's stressed and maybe they've had COVID and they're younger, why the hell would you rush out and get a vaccine if I'm doing the risk calculation? No. Save the vaccine for someone who really needs it right now. You've already had COVID. You have immunity already. Not perfect immunity. I think the vaccine's immunity is better, honestly, especially against variants. So that's how I think about that. And if I'm thinking about Johnson Johnson versus nothing, I'm getting Johnson Johnson because I'm 47 and I have look, I have 2 blood clotting disorders. There's no other vaccine. I'm still going to get Johnson and Johnson because my risk of dying of COVID-related blood clots is exponentially higher than my risk of getting blood clots from the vaccine, even if it's a known risk, right? So that's how you have to think about risk. We are horrible at determining risk. We are fear-based, emotion-driven creatures. Forgive ourselves for that. It's also what makes us wonderful human beings. It is how we are wired. We shouldn't beat ourselves up for that shit. We should celebrate that humans are humans, but then understand and accommodate that we're humans. So we're going to read this news about Johnson & Johnson. We're going to read this news about AstraZeneca. We're going to project it onto the mRNA vaccines. We're going to project risk in an incorrect way, and we're not going to get vaccinated. And we're going to put ourselves and others potentially at a higher risk of COVID. So how do we talk about that? We talk about it with love and understanding and compassion. That's the only way. And science. Science is great. It's not the end of the story, but it's great. It's the best tool we have. Just like words are great. If we don't have words, we have violence. That's why you can't stifle speech. It's the only thing we have. And by the way, speech can't hurt you. Violence hurts you. Speech is what prevents violence. All right. I got off my soapbox for a second. Someone's texting me. Let me make sure it's nothing emergent. Nope. Let's look at some questions. Let me scroll down. Boy, these questions go so fast. Will you get your daughters vaccinated when it's approved for kids? Hannah Kahn. What a great question. All right, let's talk about my daughters. I use them as examples a lot. You're not supposed to bring family into the internet, but you know what? You guys know I can't be but me. 13-year-old daughter, 9-year-old daughter. 9-year-old's about to turn 10. Let's say 10 and 13. Both of them one of them's out of school because they haven't restarted because California is stupid and just reactionary when it comes to COVID. They have no idea what they're doing with schools. Schools should be open. It's a regressive tax on the poor. And honestly, I think it's the teachers' unions and fear and good people behaving badly. Now that they can sit and do Zoom. Zoom is terrible for most children, not all. Some actually do better with Zoom. Anyways, I'm going to get off that because it's going to get my blood pressure up. I can feel it already. These children are at low risk from complications of COVID. With emerging variants, they may be more likely to be infected. These variants are a little more contagious, maybe even in kids. Are they more likely to die or have long COVID or something crazy? Probably not. I'm not worried about my children dying of COVID or getting sick from COVID. I am worried about them potentially spreading COVID to vulnerable people, including people who are vaccinated, because vaccines aren't 100% effective. And that includes my elderly parents and my wife's elderly parents. So for that reason, they mask at school and, because one's in hybrid, the other's at home. And obviously we mask when we go out, but we don't freak out about it. Would I get them vaccinated? This is how I think about them. I think my 10-year-old is extremely low risk. I think my 13-year-old, who's going to be going on 14, who's going to be going into school again in the fall, if it's approved for 12 and up, I would consider vaccinating her. And it's largely because I don't want her to have to be out of school for a week with symptoms of COVID. And I don't want to have to worry about her spreading it or something like that. So, and of course, even though she's a minor, I would ask her what she wants to do. And she's already told me I'll get the vaccine if it's available because she doesn't want to get COVID. Okay. My 9-year-old, 10-year-old, if it's approved for 12 and under, I would not rush to get her that vaccine. I just wouldn't, because I just don't see the benefit as being that high for her. And she's a different personality, a different temperament. If she comes down with those side effects meaning the fevers and the aches and all of that from the 2-dose regimen of mRNA, she's going to be a drama queen for a week, even if it only lasts for a day. And so my risk benefit for her is the benefit's smaller than the disruption. That's how I think about my own kids. That's what I would do. Me and my wife are both vaccinated. We got the mRNA vaccines. If the AstraZeneca and the Johnson Johnson were the only vaccines and it started with that, I would have gotten that, because I'm very worried about leaving my family, without a father, because I'm high risk for COVID. Being older, having the clotting disorder, being of Persian ancestry, like all those things put me at risk, even though I'm not diabetic, I'm not overweight, I don't have those other risk factors, hypertension, all that. I still worry about it. So that's how I think about risk for my kids. I think mandated vaccines for kids under 12 is crazy talk. Right now, that's crazy talk. I think mandated vaccines for anyone right now is crazy. Convince people to do their risk analysis and make the decision. Now, you could say as a business, you're not going to accept people who haven't been vaccinated. That's your choice. It's a free country. I'm a libertarian. Go ahead. But people are going to vote with their feet, and they're going to make decisions based on your use of a vaccine passport. So that's kind of how I think about it. You know, I think ethically and morally, if you take care of patients and you encounter patients and you're declining to be vaccinated without a really good reason, I think that's not a great thing to do. I think you're not being very responsible to what your calling is. So that's kind of how I think about it. And I don't think mandated vaccine is a good idea for this vaccine. You know, it's EUA authorized. It's not FDA approved yet. So you're asking people to do something in an emergency situation. It's one thing if the infection fatality rate is 10% and it's affecting children. Children are dying. And no, it's a disease that favors elders and people with chronic disease at an infection fatality rate that across the board is quite low. In that population, it's higher. So you target those populations for vaccination like the Brits did. The Israelis have vaccinated half their population, and their rates of hospitalization and cases are plummeting. By the way, let's talk about something real quick. Some people have sent me this report. It was in Reuters. Israeli vaccinated people are like something like, 5 times more likely to be infected with the South African variant of coronavirus. So does that mean that the vaccine is somehow putting you at risk to get the South African variant? And the answer is, okay, you've totally misunderstood what this very small series of patients was showing us. Let me explain. When they compared unvaccinated people to vaccinated people, first of all, there were more infections in the unvaccinated people because they're unvaccinated. The few breakthrough infections that did happen in the vaccinated group were enriched in the South African variant, the B135, I believe. And that makes sense because that variant is a little less sensitive to the antibody response triggered by those vaccines. So if you're going to get infected at all, it's probably going to be more likely with one of those variants. And that's what they saw. So if they got infected, they were more likely to be South African. Now, why weren't the unvaccinated people just swarmed with the South African variant? Well, that's a complex question, but it's felt that the UK variant and the other variants out there actually outcompete that South African variant. They're more contagious than the South African variant. So unless you have a block up there, some kind of lineman that's going to block those particular variants and let through maybe only the South African variant. Do you understand what I'm saying? So it's not that vaccine causes you to be infected with the South African variant. It's that if you are infected, the only thing that's getting through is that South African variant, and that only rarely, and that only in a small series of patients that was studied. So you got to be really careful with headlines, how people want to spin them and how they're shared. It's it can be very misleading. What about people with factor V Leiden? I have factor V, and I had the Johnson Johnson shot this past Friday, Stephanie Griffin. So I have factor V too. There's no clear evidence that having factor V puts you at higher risk for this syndrome happening in the first place. So in other words, this anti-PF4 antibody syndrome that, again, it's still poorly understood, but let's say there's some mechanism of autoimmunity that's generated by the DNA binding with PF4 and causing antibodies. First, you have to have that happen, which is exceedingly rare. If you have that happen and you develop this heparin-like syndrome, they call it now vaccine-induced immune thrombotic thrombocytopenia, or VITT, V-I-T-T. If you have that and you have factor V Leiden, then you're in bigger trouble because you're already clotting and then you have a predisposition to clot. But I don't think that the factor V Leiden itself puts you at a higher risk to have the syndrome in the first place. One of the people in the series they looked at in Europe had factor V, right? So, but it's quite common in Europe, factor V. I think 10% of the population is a heterozygous carrier. I forget what it is. It's something quite high. I'm lucky because I have that and prothrombin 2021OA, which is another like factor V-like thing. So I'm totally screwed, but that's just me. So if I stroke out in front of you, call 911. Act fast, right? That's the acronym. Facial drooping, arm weakness, speech slurry, time to call 911 or whatever your emergency service is in your country. If you're on blood thinners like Ecosprin, oh, damn it, what happened? Should you get the AstraZeneca vaccine? And if so, should that be stopped while taking the vaccine? Amrita. So I don't think there's any reason to stop any medications that you're on, but you have to talk to your own doctor because we just don't know. Remember, this is a clotting, bleeding thing. And actually, we give blood thinners as part of the treatment for like a heparin-induced thrombocytopenia, but we give other things too. So that's the best answer I can give you to that. Let's take a look here on YouTube. How about Pfizer and Moderna causing thrombocytopenia? In February, there were 36 reports of this and around 35 million people have been vaccinated, but now I cannot find updated reports on this. Yes, Gatsby. So thrombocytopenia, low blood platelets, and this actually killed a physician who it happened, they detected it right after, like a few days after you got the mRNA vaccine. It's one of the early cases. There was not a good feeling that actually the vaccine caused it. He might have already been suffering from ITP, which can happen, idiopathic thrombocytopenia purpura, and you can bleed from that, especially in adults. Now, so here's a perspective on this. It doesn't appear that these, like, yeah, there are cases of low platelets. Yeah, there are cases of blood clots. Yeah, there's cases of cancer. Yeah, there's cases of HIV. Yeah, but those vaccines did not necessarily cause those. We're seeing those at a background level that we would expect to see in that population anyways. And that's where we are so far in the absence of new data with the mRNA vaccines. Now, what's interesting, though, is there's some plausibility of vaccines and low platelets because MMR in about 1 in 100,000 children can cause transient ITP, low platelets, that actually often just responds very quickly and is almost never fatal. And it's an accepted risk that we have with those vaccines. It's, again, and that's 1 in 100,000 kids. A lot of times you don't even diagnose it. They get some bruising and then it gets better. But you do see it with MMR, and that's a risk that we all say collectively is, okay, that's all right. So in this case, we don't really see that happening, but it's not unprecedented. So it's a good question to ask. Let's see. These are great questions. Let's keep going for a little bit here. Let's see what's going on with the live chat. Someone sent me $5, but I can't see their comment. Oh, yeah, Ball Boys. Great name. $5 towards the ambulance fund in case you clot on stream. Thank you. Thank you, brother or sister. I'm going to assume with Ball Boys, it's brother, but you never know. Gender non-binary? Z-Dog, should we be scared with these blood clots? Jetro Quinta. No. No, you shouldn't. That's what I'm saying. Let me clarify that. Yeah, you're going to be scared. You're a human. You're watching the news. You're worried. Blood clots are scary. As a doctor, am I scared about the blood clots? No. Am I concerned that we make sure we know the mechanism? Yes. Do I give patients the information that I think they need to make an educated decision? Yes. Am I scared about it? No, because the risk is so low. Am I bummed that it's happening? Oh, totally. Because it's going to create vaccine hesitancy for a vaccine that was going to be the hope of the world. This was the easy vaccine that you could give to a lot of people. Johnson Johnson, the great thing is, again, refrigerator temperatures, single shot. I've done videos on this. Very effective, especially against severe disease. I mean, come on. In fact, I was talking about giving my 13-year-old, if it became approved, that shot because it's a single dose. She doesn't have to go back and get the second. I'm going to be honest with you now. If you're asking me what I would do for my daughter with that shot, she's a young lady. She's getting the mRNA vaccine because I have that choice and her risk is low. if it weren't now, knowing what I know about Johnson and Johnson, do I want the one in, in America with Johnson & Johnson, what we're seeing so far is 1 in a million risk. Would I want that with that vaccine for her, given her risk? Well, my calculation might change because I'm emotionally active with my child, right? I'm going to make a decision that's not entirely rational. I'm going to say, well, no, I don't want it for her until we get something that doesn't have that effect, because the risk of the vaccine to me is still intolerable for someone who has such a low risk of having a COVID problem, right? And then I would consider the altruism of her not spreading it to be less important to me. Because, again, that's how humans process risk. We try our best to be rational, but in the end, we have a little something that's called humanness, humanity, emotion. And I love emotion. I actually think emotion is a gift. In the present moment, to feel a raw emotion, really feel into it, is actually, it's not painful, it's not suffering, it's a joy. It's a gift that we've been given. All right, that's enough philosophy. Whirlybird, who's been asking good questions. Hey doc, vaccine hesitancy. It's not about minuscule odds of blood clots. It's about unknown delayed side effects, potentially years from now. Could you please speak about this? Thanks. Yeah, I can. We've never seen such a thing from any of our vaccines, right? We just haven't. Is it impossible? No. Is it likely? It's hard to even conceive from a biological plausibility standpoint how it would be. For example, am I worried about it? And I worry about everything. Like, I want to make sure I'm not lying to you guys. I think about my conscience if I'm telling you something that I haven't thought out myself carefully, and something happens. Like, I'm not going to be able to sleep. I don't worry about long delayed side effects because they're just, it's unprecedented. It would be something totally unusual. Now, let's say this, would I be able to sleep at night? I'm advocating you guys get vaccinated. Would I be able to sleep at night if 10 years down the line we find out that this causes some weird thing that nobody knew about? Pandemic's over. And I would say, I would, because we used the best possible data that we had, all the historical data, everything we have. And we stopped a pandemic that was killing people. We did the best we could. Am I bummed? Yeah. Do I feel bad? Sure. Would I have acted the same way again? I think so. Not knowing what I know, right? But it's the best data we have. So I think anyone who's an absolutist about vaccines one way or the other is probably wrong, and you shouldn't listen to them too much. I used to be much more of an absolutist than I am because I took it as a tribal identity badge. Like, I am in the science camp and they are in the wrong camp. They're just in the wrong camp. Anyone who's even questioning these things. I was that way for a while. Now I'm not. Now I think everybody's trying to get to their version of truth, so we have to do it with love and understanding. Now there is a fringe of people that are beyond helping here, beyond reason. And those are the people I still make fun of. All right, let's keep reading. You're not one of them, Whirlybird. You're a good questioner and a rational skeptic, and I like you already. The Global Observer. The second vaccine in France, even if you took the first vaccine of the Astra, it's going to be Pfizer. Yeah, so this has been happening. Now the government's saying, let's give the second dose as Pfizer because we don't want to give AstraZeneca, particularly for young people. And I get it. I get it. I think it's going to generate a lot of hesitancy among people who have no choice. But that's, and understanding risk, which, again, I think if you have no choice, I think the risk benefit says get the vaccine if you're in any of the higher risk groups at all. Carlos Chavez on YouTube says, do you think society is trending towards a more hypochondriac society post-COVID? If so, how will that affect our overall health? I think we're much more attuned to the news and the social contagion of fear, and that's not necessarily a good thing. It is good that we're tuned to our health. I do worry that it's not necessarily in a positive direction. I'm glad that people don't just blanket, trust whatever they're fed, but at the same time, there's been an erosion in the trust of physicians, and partially it's our fault because we've let our own system destroy our ability to spend time with patients, to look at them in the eye, to form a relationship, to be present when they're suffering. Instead, we're looking at a computer and typing about your allergies and trying to see if we can get paid the minimal amount we're going to get paid to pay our overhead and our malpractice, because we're getting sued because our society's so litigious, and every administrator wants to treat us like a cog in a wheel. And it feels like we're military people that have seen war and we can't do the right thing, and it causes us hurt and harm. And then we take it out on our patients by not being present with them. So we can do a lot better. And I think this should be a catalyst for that. We have a lot of talk about going back to normal. Has anyone had a second to think normal fucking sucked? Sorry, that's the first real curse word I've used. Now, hopefully people will still share this video. Normal sucked. Why are we going back to that? We got to go to better than normal. Our society was poisoned by social media, poisoned by sitting in commutes to chase a dream of some imaginary success that we never really achieve, no matter how much we strive. We need to look inwards. This is the chance for us to wake up from this dream, this illusion we've been living, especially in America, where we are sick. You know, we use 80% of the world's opioids. Do we have 80% of the world's pain? We probably have 80% of the world's psychological pain, suffering, because we inflict it on ourselves. We've gotten away from our families. We've gotten away from eating real food. We've gotten away from taking our time with things, from being present. We've gotten away from face-to-face relationships with other humans. That's got to change. Now's our chance. Now's our catalyst. This is it. All right. I think that's all I can do, because I'm going off the rails already. So I hope this was helpful to you guys. If you think it was, this is my pitch. Join our supporter group. It's really awesome, especially on locals. If you go to zdogmd.locals.com, it's this new platform. Go try it out. Just go try it out for free. Go get a free account and look at the comments that my supporters leave. And there's about 10,000 people there right now. It's amazing. Like, we are kind to each other, thoughtful. We provoke each other in a good way. None of this social media garbage where we're throwing feces at each other. None of this algorithmic game playing where we're trying to show off. It's just good conversation in the alt middle, which is this integral perspective where we see all sides and we're compassionate, but we still have strong belief. And it's great. Join us there. Join us anywhere. Join us on Facebook. Join us on YouTube. You can give us these one-time donations on paypal.me/zdogmd, and then I respond to whatever your comment is with that donation by email. So it's a way of getting my attention and gratitude. So that's it. That's it. All right. I love you guys. I really do. It is it's a gift and a joy to be able to be with you and talk about this stuff that's really bothering us, that's getting under our skin. And the media doesn't, bless their hearts. They don't do a great job. They can't. It's not in their financial interest to do a great job at this. So we try our best to fill in the gaps and take the good media and interpret it for you. All right, guys? Love you. And we are out. Peace. Yeah, I found the fader button.